Moonlight hit her face and wolf markings appeared. The Alpha King dropped the execution blade. Ever since she could remember, she felt different. Her dreams were never quiet. They roared with strange voices, the gleam of silver eyes and the taste of cold moonlight. But she had learned to hide it. She had to. Her village was small, nestled between dark forests and misty hills, a place where the ordinary feared the extraordinary. Selene lived at the edge, tending herbs, mending wounds, and listening to the ancient stories the elders whispered at night. She had learned that magic, even the faintest, was dangerous in human hands. And yet, she could not ignore the pulsing energy within her, a presence that thrummed whenever the moon was high and full. The rumors began quietly. At first, a lost cow returned with strange markings etched into its hide. Then, a sick child healed too quickly, almost unnaturally. Finally, a villager swore she had seen Selene's shadow stretch into the shape of a wolf under the full moon. Fear grew faster than the truth, and whispers traveled like wildfire. By the time the royal guards arrived at her small, crooked house, the village had already decided. The healer was cursed. Selene did not resist when the guards came. They were strong, armored in black and silver, their faces hidden under steel helmets. They did not speak, but their eyes, when they met hers, were full of suspicion and fear. She had expected anger, violence, shouts. Instead, there was only silence as they led her through the forest path, the trees closing above her like the walls of a dark cathedral. The journey to the capital was long, and Selene spent it in silence, her hands bound with rope that felt strangely warm against her skin. She tried to calm herself, whispering the old words her grandmother had taught her, the ones that promised protection, control, and safety. But as the moon climbed higher, she felt it again. The pull in her chest, the rising warmth in her arms and legs, the sense that something ancient and wild was watching her. When the city gates finally loomed before her, she could see the crowd that had gathered, whispering in awe and fear. The capital was not like her village. Towers of stone scraped the sky, banners of black and silver flapped in the wind, and lanterns burned with golden light that could not touch the shadows. Yet even here, Selene felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her, heavier than any chains. The trial was held in the grand courtyard of the palace. She was placed on the stone platform, her feet chained, her head high despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Nobles and soldiers alike watched from behind the gilded railings. At the center of the courtyard, under the silver gaze of the full moon, stood him, King Kaelin, the Alpha King. Kaelin was a man of legend, feared even by his own court. Stories told of his strength, his cunning, and the cruel efficiency with which he executed those who defied him. Yet Selene noticed something else. Beneath the sharp lines of his face, under the cold glare of his eyes, there was a shadow of something older, something sad. Something that recognized her. The court fell silent as Kaelin stepped forward. His armor gleamed under the moonlight, but it was his eyes that held her attention, dark, penetrating, alive. He studied her as one might study a rare animal, curious yet cautious, aware of the danger she might carry. "You stand accused of witchcraft," Kaelin said, his voice low but carrying through the courtyard like a blade, "and of daring to awaken powers forbidden to mortals." Selene's heart beat wildly, but she refused to bend her head. "I have done no wrong," she said, her voice steady though her chest quivered. "I only healed the sick and tended the land." Kaelin's gaze did not waver. "The moon does not lie," he said, and with a flick of his wrist the guard stepped back. The light of the full moon struck Selene's face directly, bathing her in its silver glow. And then, as if the very night itself had decided, the markings appeared. They started faintly at first, silvery lines curling across her skin like delicate veins of light. Within moments, they spread rapidly, forming the unmistakable shape of a wolf across her arms, her face, and her chest. The crowd gasped. Nobles whispered. Even the guards stepped back, uncertain, as the air around her seemed to thrum with energy. Selene fell to her knees, trembling not with fear but with awe. She could feel the magic rising, pulsing through her like a heartbeat. She did not understand it, but she could not deny it. This power had chosen her, whether she wanted it or not. Kalen froze, his hand on the execution blade at his side. His eyes widened, but he did not move. He had seen the markings once before, centuries ago, in a legend of the cursed alphas. He knew the signs. He knew that the wolf markings were a signal, a bond to the ancient power he himself carried. And yet he was still human, and still conflicted. "You are marked," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper, yet it carried over the stunned silence of the courtyard. "By the moon, by the wolf, by a destiny that I cannot yet understand." Selene lifted her face, meeting his gaze. She felt it in her bones, the connection, the pull, the recognition of something old and wild. Fear and curiosity battled in her heart. She did not know what he was thinking, but she knew one thing. The Alpha King had never hesitated to kill, and yet the blade in his hand did not move. A long moment stretched between them, filled with tension, electricity, and the weight of unspoken truths. The crowd waited, holding its collective breath. The guards tightened their grip on their weapons, ready to act. Nobles whispered of curses, of omens, of the danger of the marked woman before them. And then Kalen did something unexpected. He lowered the blade, slowly, deliberately. The murmurs of the crowd rose into shocked whispers. Selene blinked, unable to comprehend. Her knees scraped against the stone as she realized what had happened. He had spared her. Not out of mercy, perhaps, not yet, but because something in him told him she was not his enemy. Something in him feared what might happen if he struck. Kalen stepped closer, his presence commanding, overwhelming, yet strangely protective. "Do you know what this marking means?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl. "Do you know the path you walk now?" Selene shook her head. "No, I only know it is part of me, and it scares me." Kalen's gaze softened for a fleeting moment, but then hardened again. "Fear is natural," he said, "but it does not protect you from what is coming, and it does not protect me either." For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other, two souls connected by something ancient and powerful. Selene could feel the pull of his wolf spirit, the energy of his curse brushing against her own. It was terrifying, and yet she could not turn away. She wanted to understand him, even as he wanted to understand her. The court remained silent, uncertain of what would come next. Whispers spread like fire, rumors of the marked woman and the Alpha King who dared to drop his blade. Some whispered that it was fear that stopped him. Others said it was curiosity. But Selene knew something else. She felt it in her pulse, in the warmth of the night, in the shiver that ran down her spine. This moment had changed everything. The moonlight faded slowly as the night deepened, but the markings on Selene's skin remained, glowing faintly, as if they had imprinted the memory of the moon itself. Kalen turned, his expression unreadable, and signaled the guards to take her to a chamber within the palace. As she was led away, Selene glanced back at the king. Their eyes met once more, and in that glance she saw the storm of conflict inside him, a mixture of duty, fear, and something far more dangerous, recognition, and perhaps the first spark of desire. Selene's heart ached with longing, fear, and an odd sense of hope. The journey ahead would be dangerous, and she knew the Alpha King could destroy her with a single strike. Yet in that moment she felt something else as well, that perhaps he would not. That perhaps, in the darkness of the night and the silver light of the moon, they were tied together by destiny, and that the story of the marked woman and the Alpha King was only beginning. And as the chamber doors closed behind her, sealing her fate within the walls of the palace, Selene whispered to herself, "I will not be afraid." But even as she said it, the wolf within her stirred, restless, impatient, and aware. Outside, Kalen lingered, his hand brushing the hilt of his blade. He did not move to strike. He did not yet understand why. But deep inside, something old and powerful had awakened, and it would not rest until he knew the truth. And so the night stretched on, full of secrets, unspoken truths, and the first spark of a bond that could change the fate of a kingdom forever. The first night in the palace was colder than Selene had imagined. Her room was small, bare, with stone walls that seemed to drink in the light of the flickering torch on the wall. She shivered, not from the chill, but from the weight of everything that had happened. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, tracing the faint glow of her wolf markings in the moonlight that seeped through the small window. They pulsed softly, as if alive, reminding her that she was no longer just a healer from a quiet village. She was something more, something powerful and dangerous. Outside the door, footsteps echoed. The sound was familiar, deliberate, and heavy. Kaelin's steps. She froze, her heart beating faster than she had thought possible. She had barely spent a day in his presence, and yet she felt the pull of his power like a tether. The door opened without a word. Kaelin stood there, his tall figure framed by the torchlight from the hallway. His eyes were sharp, assessing, yet there was a strange hesitation in his posture. "You should not be left alone," he said, his voice low. "The palace is not safe for someone like you." Selene straightened. "Why are you here?" she asked. "I am a prisoner." "You do not owe me anything." Kaelin's jaw tightened. "I do not strike what I cannot understand," he said, "and I cannot understand you yet." Selene's gaze flicked to the wolf markings on her arms. They shimmered faintly as if aware of his presence. "I am not dangerous," she whispered. "I do not want to hurt anyone." Kaelin's eyes softened slightly. "And yet power like yours is rarely harmless," he said. He stepped closer and Selene felt the air shift. The tension between them was palpable, a mix of fear and fascination that neither could deny. "You are bound by the mark," Kaelin continued. "And that mark is not just a blessing. It is a curse, one that links you to the ancient wolf lineage. It could consume you if you do not learn to control it." Selene swallowed hard. "Then teach me," she said. "If I am cursed, I want to understand it. I want to use it for good, not for harm." Kaelin's gaze flickered with something unspoken. No king had ever asked him for guidance in this way. No one had ever asked him for trust. Yet there was something in her, the quiet strength, the defiance, the fear and hope intertwined, that made him pause. "I cannot stay long," he said finally, "but you will learn eventually. Not everything at once. The wolf within you is patient, but it is also relentless. It will demand more than you are ready to give." Selene nodded, determination shining in her eyes. She was ready. If he would guide her, she would face whatever came. The following days were filled with tension and observation. Kaelin did not release her from the palace, but he allowed her to move freely within certain walls. She tended to the wounded soldiers in secret chambers and helped the villagers who came to the palace seeking aid. Yet everywhere she went, whispers followed her. The palace servants, the guards, even the nobles. They feared her. They feared the markings that glowed faintly under the moonlight, and they feared the Alpha King who had chosen to spare her. Kaelin observed silently, his shadow always near. He watched her work, listened to her words, noted her reactions. He was both teacher and judge, testing her patience and strength, and he found himself unsettled by his own reactions. He had ruled for decades, his life defined by fear and control, yet this woman stirred emotions he had long buried. Curiosity, admiration, and something far more dangerous, an awareness that he wanted to protect her. One evening, as the moon rose high and silver, Selene wandered into the palace garden. The night air was cool and fragrant with jasmine. She moved to the fountain in the center, running her fingers through the water, thinking about the strange path her life had taken. "You walk freely," Kaelin's voice came from behind her, "and yet you are still a prisoner." She did not turn. "I feel freer here than I did in my village," she admitted. "There, fear followed me. Here I am being tested, but at least I am not hunted." Kaelin stepped closer, the moonlight catching on the edges of his armor. "Tests can be cruel," he said, And sometimes the hunter and the hunted are the same person. Selene turned, meeting his gaze. There was something in his eyes she could not name, a depth of pain and power, loneliness and desire. "You speak as if you understand me," she said softly. Kaelin's jaw tightened. "I do," he said, though his voice held a weight that she could not fully comprehend. "Because I have lived with a curse of my own. I understand the hunger for connection and the fear of destruction. You are not alone in your struggle, though you may believe yourself so." Selene felt a shiver run down her spine. "Then perhaps we can help each other," she whispered. Kaelin did not answer immediately. He simply studied her, his dark eyes searching for something he could not yet name. And in that silence a bond formed, a fragile thread of trust and unspoken understanding. The tension in the palace grew when the nobles began to take notice of Selene's presence. Some argued she was a threat to the throne, a symbol of defiance, while others whispered that her markings were a blessing, a power that could protect the kingdom from darker forces that lurked beyond the borders. One day, as Selene walked the corridors, a commotion erupted in the central hall. Soldiers rushed past her, and she saw nobles whispering urgently, their eyes wide with fear. She ran to the nearest window and looked out, and her heart froze. From the edge of the forest, dark shapes moved, creatures unlike any she had seen before. They were shadowy, twisted forms, moving as if made of smoke and darkness, their eyes glinting with malevolence. Kaelin was already there, his armor gleaming under the sunlight that still touched the morning. He drew his sword, and the creatures faltered as if sensing his power. But he did not fight alone. Selene felt the wolf within her stir, and she stepped forward, her markings glowing faintly in response. "Do not," Kaelin's voice rang through the hall. "You cannot control it yet. Stay back." But Selene did not move. She felt the energy building inside her, the connection to the moon, the wolf, and the Alpha King himself. She could not let these creatures harm the people of the palace. She closed her eyes, letting the power rise, letting it flow through her, and in a burst of silver light the creatures were pushed back, retreating into the forest. The courtyard was silent. Nobles stared, guards whispered, and Selene's heart pounded. She had not meant to draw attention to herself, yet she had done more than protect the palace. She had revealed the strength she carried. Kaelin's gaze met hers, and for the first time there was no hesitation in his eyes. There was admiration, yes, but also fear. Fear of what she could become, fear of what he might feel. He stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "You are stronger than you know," he said softly. "But strength without control is dangerous. You must learn or it will consume you." Selene nodded, understanding the warning but also sensing a shift in their relationship. He was no longer just the king, the alpha, the ruler she feared. He was a man who recognized her power, who respected it, and perhaps even depended on it. Days passed, and their training began in earnest. Kaelin taught her how to sense the presence of danger, how to calm the surge of energy that threatened to overwhelm her, and how to trust her instincts without giving in to fear. In return, Selene taught him patience, empathy, and a connection to the world beyond his throne and his curse. Yet with every lesson, the tension between them grew. Words were charged, glances lingered, and the faint touch of a hand or a guiding gesture sent shivers down her spine. They were aware of it both, and yet neither dared speak of it. The stakes were too high, the danger too real. Their bond had begun in fear and power, and now it was tempered with trust and something far more fragile. One night, as the moon rose high and full, Selene stood alone in the palace garden again. She watched the reflection of her markings in the water, thinking of the path that lay ahead. The wolf within her stirred, restless and impatient. She felt a presence behind her and knew, without turning, that Kaelin was near. "You are ready," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble. "But the world is not, and neither am I." Selene turned, meeting his gaze. "Then we will face it together," she said. Kalen's eyes darkened with emotion, but before he could speak, a loud crash echoed from the northern gate. Shadows moved in the distance, faster, stronger than before. Seleni's heart raced. Kalen's hand went to his sword. "They have come," he said, his voice tense but steady. "And this time, there will be no second chance." Selene felt the wolf within her pulse, the markings on her skin glowing in the moonlight. Fear and excitement intertwined. She had learned, but she was far from mastering her power. Yet one thing was clear: she would not stand alone. Not tonight. Not ever. And in that moment, as the shadows approached, the Alpha King and the marked woman faced their first true test together, bound by destiny, power, and a connection that neither fully understood. The night stretched before them, filled with danger, uncertainty, and the first spark of something far more powerful than fear: trust, and the beginning of something neither of them could resist. The forest outside the palace was alive with shadows. Even in daylight, it seemed dark, thick with ancient trees whose twisted branches clawed at the sky. Selene's heart raced as she followed Kalen, the Alpha King, through the underbrush. This was not the palace, not the place of order or stone walls. Here everything was wild, dangerous, and unpredictable. "You must stay close," Kalen instructed, his voice firm but quiet. "The creatures in this forest are not ordinary. They are drawn to your markings, your energy." Selene glanced at the silvery glow of her wolf markings, still faint under the dim sunlight. The pulsing warmth reminded her of the power inside, of the bond she shared with the Alpha King. It was thrilling and frightening all at once. "I won't fall behind," she said, though her nerves tightened like ropes around her chest. Kalen's eyes softened for a brief moment. "I trust you," he said. Then, as if to remind himself of the danger, he added, "But trust can be fragile. We cannot afford mistakes here." The journey into the heart of the forest was long. Twisting paths led them over moss-covered stones and through dense thickets. Birds watched silently from the treetops, and occasionally the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint echo of something unseen. Selene could feel the wolf within her stirring, sensing every motion, every rustle of leaves. "You feel it, don't you?" Kalen asked, noticing the tension in her stance. "The forest is alive with intent. It tests us. It watches us." Selene nodded. "Yes, it feels like it wants something." Her voice was barely a whisper, but Kalen heard it. He knew her instincts were sharp, her senses heightened by the wolf spirit that marked her. Hours passed without incident until they reached a clearing. The sunlight broke through the trees in a single golden beam, illuminating a stone circle in the center of the clearing. The air felt thick, heavy with magic, as if the place itself remembered something long forgotten. Kalen's hand went to his sword, but he did not draw it. "This is a place of power," he said. "The ancient wolves once roamed freely here. Their spirits linger. Be careful, Selene. They will recognize you." Selene stepped forward, her bare hands brushing over the smooth surface of the stones. She felt a connection immediately, a hum of energy that made her markings flare softly. "I can feel them," she said, her voice trembling with awe. "They know me." Kalen watched her, his face unreadable. There was pride, yes, but also fear. He had seen the ancient wolf spirits only once in his life, and even then their presence had shaken him to his core. That Selene could reach them so easily was both a blessing and a danger. Suddenly, the forest fell silent. The birds no longer chirped. The wind ceased to blow. Selene's wolf markings glowed brighter under the filtered sunlight, casting silver light across the clearing. And then, from the shadows of the trees, they appeared. Creatures made of darkness, taller than men, with eyes that glowed like embers, stepped into the clearing. Their movements were fluid, almost liquid, yet there was a sharpness to them that spoke of predatory intelligence. Selene's heart pounded. She had seen them before near the palace gates, but here they seemed stronger, more daring. Kalen moved in front of her instinctively, sword drawn. "Stay behind me," he commanded. "Do not let fear control you." Selene clenched her fists. Fear was present, yes, but so was power, the strange, wild energy of her markings. She could feel the wolf spirit inside her rising, responding to the threat, and she knew she could help Kaelin. "I won't hide," she said firmly. The creatures circled, hissing in low, resonant tones. Kaelin's sword gleamed under the sunlight, but even his strength alone would not be enough. One step too far, one wrong move, and they could be overwhelmed. Then Selene closed her eyes, letting her instincts guide her. She focused on the energy of the clearing, on the bond she felt with Kaelin and the wolf spirit within her. Slowly, her markings flared brighter, a silver blaze that illuminated the shadows. The creatures recoiled, their glowing eyes narrowing, unsure of the source of this sudden power. Kaelin's voice cut through the tension. "Now, Selene." She moved instinctively, hands raised, and the silver light surged outward, creating a barrier that forced the shadow creatures back. They shrieked, a sound that cut through the air like ice, but they did not flee entirely. They waited, circling, testing her. Kaelin moved beside her, his blade swinging with precision and strength. Together, they became a single force, him with his skill and authority, her with the magic of the wolf spirit and the moon markings. The creatures lunged, and Selene responded without hesitation, guiding bursts of light to push them back, her confidence growing with each movement. Time seemed to stretch. The forest was alive with magic and danger. Selene realized that her markings were not just a curse, they were a guide, a tool. She could feel the wolf spirit in her, teaching her, nudging her toward strength. And Kaelin was her anchor. Wherever he moved, she moved. Together they were stronger than either alone. After what felt like hours, the creatures finally retreated into the shadows. The clearing was silent once more, save for the sound of Selene's ragged breathing and Kaelin's steady stance beside her. "You did well," Kaelin said, sheathing his sword. His gaze held something more than approval. There was wonder, respect, and something that made Selene's heart ache, a bond she could not yet name. Selene nodded, still trembling slightly. I never thought I could control it," she admitted. "I was afraid it would consume me." Kaelin placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "Fear is a guide, not a chain," he said. "You must learn to trust yourself as much as you trust me." For a moment, the weight of the moment sank in. Selene felt the full force of what had happened. She had faced the creatures, used her power, and survived. And she had done it not alone, but with the Alpha King at her side. The thought sent shivers down her spine, part pride, part fear, and part something she could not name. They made camp near the clearing, lighting a small fire. The forest remained silent around them, the shadows lingering just beyond the reach of the firelight. Selene sat close to the warmth, her markings dimming as the adrenaline faded. Kaelin sat opposite her, his sword resting nearby, eyes scanning the darkness. "You trust me," Selene said after a long silence, her voice soft. Kaelin's gaze met hers. "I do," he admitted, "but trust is earned, not given freely. And I do not yet know the limits of your power or your heart." Selene's breath caught. The tension between them was not just about power. It was about understanding, connection, and something neither of them could fully articulate. She realized that their bond was growing, forged in danger, trust, and shared purpose. The night deepened. Stars pierced the sky above the dense forest canopy. Selene lay back on the ground, staring upward, feeling the pulse of her markings in rhythm with her heartbeat. She felt alive, more than she ever had in the quiet village. And yet a part of her worried. The creatures were only the beginning. The forest, the palace, and the kingdom held dangers far beyond what she had faced. Kaelin remained watchful, his presence a constant, silent reassurance. At times, Selene caught him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. There was something in his eyes, something fierce, protective, and full of questions that had no answers yet. As sleep finally began to pull at her, Selene felt the wolf spirit stir again. It was impatient, restless. It seemed to whisper of challenges to come, of enemies unseen, and of a destiny that could not be avoided. She did not fear it. She had learned that fear could be faced and transformed into power. Kalen's voice broke the silence, low and steady. "Tomorrow, we move deeper into the forest," he said. "There are forces here that do not wish to see either of us survive. You must be ready." Selene nodded, determination in her eyes. "I am ready," she said, "and I will not run." Kalen studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slightly, almost as if confirming something to himself. "Good," he said. "We face them together. And no matter what comes, you must remember, power without control destroys as easily as it protects. Do not forget that." Selene nodded again, feeling the weight of his words, the bond between them and the challenges yet to come. The night pressed on, silent and watchful. Somewhere in the shadows, creatures waited, hungry and patient. And yet, for the first time, Selene did not feel alone. She had Kalen at her side, her wolf spirit guiding her, and the knowledge that she could face whatever came next. The forest held secrets, dangers, and power beyond imagination. And as the first light of dawn touched the treetops, Selene understood that the real test was only beginning. Together with the Alpha King, she would face the darkness, the shadows, and perhaps even the truth of her own destiny. And somewhere, deep in the forest, eyes glowed in anticipation, watching the marked woman and the Alpha King as they prepared to step into a world that had been waiting for them. The night had ended, but the adventure and the danger was far from over. The kingdom trembled under a sky cloaked in darkness. The moon was eclipsed, leaving silver shadows across the land. The wind howled through the streets of the capital, carrying whispers of fear and uncertainty. Selene stood at the palace gates, her wolf markings glowing faintly under the dim light, every pulse of her magic echoing through her veins. Kalen was beside her, tall and unyielding as always, his eyes scanning the horizon for the threat they had both known would come. The rogue faction that had captured Selene once before had returned, emboldened, stronger, and seeking revenge. They believed she was the key to the Alpha King's downfall. They were wrong, but that did not make them any less dangerous. "You are ready," Kalen said, his voice calm but firm. His hand brushed against hers, a grounding touch that steadied her, though neither spoke of the emotions swirling beneath the surface. "Do not let fear rule you," Selene nodded. "I won't," she whispered. But even as she said it, her wolf spirit stirred, impatient, sensing danger in every shadow. She had learned much in the forest, yet she knew the trials ahead would demand everything she had, and more. The palace courtyard was silent except for the faint footsteps of the guards who remained loyal. The rogue forces struck suddenly, emerging from the shadows like black smoke. They were armed with dark magic, twisted weapons, and intentions that chilled even the bravest soldiers. Kalen raised his sword, a silver blaze in the dim light, and stepped forward. "Hold the line," he commanded, and the loyal guards formed ranks behind him. Selene felt the wolf spirit rise within her, her markings glowing brighter. She stepped forward, channeling her energy into a shield of silver light that pulsed outward, protecting the soldiers from the first wave of dark magic. The creatures recoiled, hissing in frustration. Kalen fought with precision, his blade cutting through shadows, moving with the strength and speed of the alpha within him. But Selene was not behind him. She was beside him, moving in rhythm, her power guiding the flow of battle. Every surge of energy from her markings pushed back the darkness. Every glance shared with Kalen a silent coordination of instinct and trust. The rogue leader emerged, a figure cloaked in black, eyes glinting with cruelty. "You think you can stop me?" the figure sneered. "You are but mortals playing with forces you cannot control." Selene's markings flared, illuminating her face like the full moon itself. "We are more than you imagine," she said, her voice steady, powerful. The wolf spirit inside her responded to her conviction, thrumming through her in waves of silver light. The rogue leader struck, sending a wave of dark energy toward them. Kaelin parried, and Selene released her power, the silver light colliding with the dark magic in a brilliant explosion. The shockwave threw both sides back, dust and energy swirling in the courtyard like a storm. Selene felt the connection to Kaelin deepen in that moment. She understood him in ways words could never express. He was her anchor, and she was the spark that could guide him beyond the shadow of his curse. Together, they were unstoppable. The rogue leader advanced again, their dark magic growing more chaotic. Kaelin moved to strike, but Selene stopped him with a hand on his arm. "We fight together," she said firmly. "Not alone." Kaelin's eyes met hers, and in that moment unspoken trust passed between them. They moved as one. Kaelin's sword met the rogue leader's dark energy, while Selene channeled her power through the ground, sending silver tendrils of light to bind the shadows and protect the soldiers. The rogue leader faltered, surprised by their combined strength. For the first time, Selene felt the full potential of her markings. The wolf spirit within her roared, a fierce, protective energy that enveloped the battlefield. Shadows screamed, twisting and writhing as her light consumed them. The soldiers watched in awe, inspired, their courage renewed by the brilliance of her power and the Alpha King's unwavering command. Kaelin's eyes softened as he glanced at Selene. "You've grown stronger," he said, though there was no pride in his voice, only deep respect. "Stronger than even I expected," Selene's breath caught. "And you've taught me," she replied. "You believed I could do this." Their exchange was brief, but it gave both of them strength. The rogue leader, seeing their unity, realized they could not win by brute force alone. With a final scream, they hurled a concentrated wave of dark energy at Selene. She felt it strike, a painful jolt that threatened to overwhelm her. Kaelin's instincts kicked in. He threw himself in front of her, deflecting the energy with his sword and shouting, "Focus!" "Channel it." Selene closed her eyes, reaching deep into the wolf spirit inside her. She let it flow through her, letting the moonlight within her rise. Her markings flared so brightly that the shadows shrieked, unable to bear the purity of the light. The rogue leader stumbled, their strength failing as their dark magic was absorbed and neutralized. Kaelin seized the moment, moving with lethal precision. With one swift strike, he disarmed the rogue leader, sending their weapon flying into the courtyard. Selene's light dimmed slightly, exhausted but steady. The rogue leader fell to their knees, defeated, their dark magic dissipating into nothing. The battlefield was quiet now, save for the breathing of soldiers, the crackle of fading energy, and the soft glow of Selene's markings. The kingdom had survived the night, and for the first time, hope felt tangible. Kaelin lowered his sword and stepped toward Selene. "You have done more than survive," he said, his voice deep and steady. "You have protected the kingdom and perhaps even me." Selene looked at him, her chest rising and falling with exertion. "We did it together," she said. "You were beside me every step of the way." Kaelin's expression softened, a rare vulnerability showing through his usual stoic mask. "Yes," he admitted, "and I could not have done it without you." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the battle settling around them. The moonlight, though eclipsed, glimmered faintly, catching the edges of their faces, their markings, their swords. The air was still, filled with unspoken words, unexpressed emotions, and the quiet thrill of survival. "You have changed," Kaelin said finally, his voice low. "Not just your power, but everything. You are no longer the girl I found in my palace. You are something far greater." Selene's heart ached with the intensity of the moment. "And you have changed me," she replied. "You've shown me what it means to trust, to fight, to survive. To believe in myself." Kaelin's eyes darkened, the familiar weight of his curse lingering. "The danger is not over," he warned. "There will always be those who seek to destroy us, to take what they do not understand. But now I see a way forward. Because together we are stronger than the shadows." Selene reached for his hand, hesitant, then firm. Their fingers intertwined, a silent acknowledgement of what they had shared, fought for, and discovered in the heat of battle. For the first time, they allowed themselves a quiet connection, not of words, but of trust, respect, and the beginnings of something far deeper. The eclipse passed, and the moonlight struck the kingdom once more. Seleni's markings shimmered in harmony with Kaelin's presence, a visual testament to their bond. The soldiers and nobles who had witnessed the battle whispered in awe. They had seen not just the defeat of a rogue faction, but the emergence of a new force within the kingdom, one of unity, power, and hope. As dawn approached, Selene and Kaelin stood together on the balcony of the palace. The city below stirred to life, the shadows of the night fading. Selene looked at the Alpha King, seeing the man beneath the legend, the man capable of love, of care, and of redemption. Kaelin gazed at her, his eyes reflecting the first rays of sunlight. "You are no longer just marked," he said softly. "You are a protector, a force, a bond to the kingdom and to me." Selene's chest swelled with emotion. "And you are no longer just a king," she replied. "You are someone who can trust, who can love, who can lead not just with fear but with courage and heart." For the first time in decades, Kaelin allowed himself a small smile, a fleeting but powerful sign of relief, pride, and something far more tender. They had faced the darkness, survived the trials, and discovered each other in ways neither had anticipated. The kingdom was not yet fully healed, nor was their journey entirely complete. Shadows lingered beyond the walls, threats waited in silence, and the future was uncertain. But together, Selene and Kaelin had faced the impossible, united in purpose, power, and destiny. And as they stood in the morning light, wolf markings and alpha strength intertwined, the kingdom knew that a new era had begun. One where love, trust, and courage could conquer fear, where redemption was possible, and where the marked woman and the Alpha King would write their own legend. The wolf spirit within Selene stirred one last time, not with impatience but with calm assurance. The moon had chosen her, the Alpha had guided her, and together they had become more than legend. They had become a force that could never be ignored. The adventure was over for now, but the bond they shared, forged in trials, danger, and trust, would endure. And somewhere, deep in the forest, the shadows that had once threatened the kingdom watched silently, knowing that the next chapter was not theirs to write. Selene looked at Kaelin and he looked back. No words were needed. The battle had ended, but the story of their bond, their redemption, and their shared destiny had only just begun. The kingdom, the moon, and the wolf spirit bore witness. And in that silent acknowledgement they knew, together they could face anything.